welcome to Literary Prospects, where we talk to authors and literary professionals about books, publishing, and the writing life. I'm Kelley Vick. I'm the host of the program, and in just a moment, it will be my pleasure to introduce today's guest. But first, a reminder that if you like what you hear, please do take a moment to subscribe. It helps us out, and you can make sure you never miss an episode. Also, we've opened a Literary Prospects shop, so if you're looking for bookish shirts, totes, and gifts, please check that out at literaryprospects.etsy.com. And to grab books featured on the podcast and check out more curated book lists, you can visit the Literary Prospects bookstore on bookshop.org. We'll leave all those links below in the show notes. And now, let's introduce today's guest. Wendy Dale loves memoir. She's the author of Avoiding Prison and Other Notable Vacation Goals, and most recently, the Memoir Engineering System. Wendy taught memoir writing for Media Bistro for 6 years before founding Memoir Writing for Geniuses, which offers courses and coaching to shave years off the book writing process. And her essays and articles have appeared in Mental Floss, Public Radio International, the Writer's Digest website, and others. Wendy currently lives with her husband and 2 bunnies in Cusco, Peru. Wendy Dale, thank you so much for being here to discuss memoir writing and your new craft book, The Memoir Engineering System. I normally start off by reading a few blurbs, so although we're here today to discuss your coaching, I thought that I would read a few blurbs from your own memoir, Avoiding Prison and Other Notable Vacation Goals. Great title. So author and filmmaker Paul Feig says Wendy Dale is an extremely talented writer who can make even the scariest vacation sound like a good time. Author Rita Golden Gelman says, funny, impulsive, and alluringly naive, Wendy Dale is repeatedly swept into adventure and trouble and love, mostly when she's looking the other way. I read the book in one sitting. And author Deborah C. Kogan says, mix David Sedaris, Lucille Ball, and a fifth of tequila in a blender, and you get Wendy Dale, who is quite possibly the funniest travel writer since Homer. But strain off the foamy giggles, and you're left with a raw, smart, and passionate woman in search of herself, and awestruck at the beauty of even the ugliest corners. So with that, let's dive in today to the discussion. Your latest book is The Memoir Engineering System. What made you decide to write a craft book now?
Well, you've given me so much to respond to, Kelley. I haven't heard those blurbs in quite a while. So I wrote my memoir a long time ago. I actually wrote my memoir in my 20s, which was a long time ago. I come to this as a writer. You know, I grew up wanting to be a writer. I decided I would be a writer in college, worked as a screenwriter, and then decided that I really wanted to write books. And so I wrote my memoir. Why would I write a book on how to write a memoir? It's kind of a long story, and I guess it starts with the misconceptions that I had as a memoir writer. So I really wanted to write a book, and I thought, wow, memoir must be pretty easy. You just write down what you lived through, and boy, has this been a learning process. So my own memoir came out in 2003, right? So this is, more than 20 years ago, and even after getting my memoir published, it still has been a learning process because memoir, I have come around to the other side, and I think it's probably the hardest genre you can write in. So I really wrote this book so that people don't struggle with the same issues that I had as a memoir writer. I love memoir writing, and I love learning about how memoir is constructed, and I've done it, a lot of it over the past 20 years, and I really wanted to share that information with other people because when I wrote my memoir, I never found the information out there because I really just thought you were writing about your life, and boy, was this a learning process for me. It's really not that at all. So
what is it that makes memoir so difficult?
Deep sigh there, right? What makes it so difficult is the fact that you remember the stuff happening, right? And so with fiction, you're creating plot, you're only putting down on the page what the story requires. With memoir, you have so much information and you're carving away from you're carving memories away until what you're left with is plot, right? And so people have this misconception that I'll just write about my life, just like I thought. Now, even though I had a really solid premise, I knew what my book was about, even so, there's still so many structural issues with writing memoir, right? So there's so many, when I say structure, it's the same as plot. How do you take these real life stories from your life and find plot out of these real life stories? And that is really hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You your book is a system, the memoir system. What's the difference in a formula and a system?
I hate formulas. And I love systems, right? So
I
that's a
know
great
this from
question.
reading.
Oh, get a little passionate in those pages, right? Um, so I compare a formula to having a recipe, right? So if you do have a recipe for pancakes, you're probably going to come up with a decent plate of pancakes. But I call having a system being a chef. So I'm really teaching people the principles that all memoirs follow. And it took me more than 15 years of reading manuscript after manuscript after manuscript and seeing that they had similar problems. And that was actually really exciting to me because it's not that you're a bad writer, right? If people are having the same issues over and over again, there's a memoir writing error. And if there's an error, it can be corrected. If there's an error, there's a principle that you're violating. So the way I came up with these principles, which create the memoir engineering system, was discovering errors, traps that writers fall into, and saying, well, they're obviously they're violating this principle. And what is the principle? And so if I could teach them the principle and we could do that time and time again, they would write a book without making these mistakes that I made, by the way. So this is why I'm really passionate about it. Was I have committed every mistake that I've seen my clients and my students make. So I really relate to that.
You say there are two principal components of a memoir.
Yes.
What are those?
What are they? Yeah. So when I talk about components, I'm talking about creating plot, right? And so these two components, so there are different ways to look at a memoir, but when it comes to creating plot in your book, when it comes to taking these real life events you lived through and turning them into plot, turning them into a story that someone else wants to read, you do have these two components, and they are scenes and transitions. And scenes and transitions follow very different principles. In fact, the premise of the memoir engineering system is that if you use scenes or transitions, if you violate the principles for either one of these, your plot won't work. So it took me a long time to really come to this very simple concept that scenes do something very different for your memoir than transitions do. They work the same in novels as well. So these are principles that any memoir that works will follow. Novels do follow the same principles, but you have to get to writing a novel in a different way, right? You're just making stuff up, whereas it's much more difficult. So these principles become really important when it comes to memoir writing, but they do apply to novel writing as well.
Yeah. You say that theme is not going to get you there, right? We're talking about plot here and structure. Theme is not
Yeah,
going to get you to structure, you say. Can you speak to that?
I can. So really what it took me a very long time to discover is that plot is connected events, right? Connected events. So without getting too much into this, without connected events basically means,
We can get into it too.
do you want to get into it? Oh, you
Let's
want
get
to go
into
for
it.
it. Okay, I love
I
it.
love getting into
I love it.
it.
Okay. Well, so I was trying to answer. I think I'm going to give you a long answer to why theme doesn't create plot. Let's go back to theme for a second. If you want to get into it, we'll go
Yeah.
back to that in a sec. Um, so think people use the word theme really lightly, right? I think I tend to for me, theme is a universal idea that is present throughout your book.
Mhm.
Now, I think all books need a theme. I think they do, but it would be something like searching for belonging, having a loving relationship with my family members, the power of love. All of these are universal themes, and that is super important in your book. But I have so many people who come to me and they say, okay, I want to write a memoir about the power of romantic love in my life. I'm like, great. Okay, what's the story?
Mhm.
And that's when they get stuck. Theme does not create story, story creates theme. So you
Mhm.
have to have a theme in your book. Absolutely, that's super important. But starting with this theme, people come with this deep universal idea, especially if they're academics, right? And they've been studying, they've had PhDs in literature, and they've been taught theme, theme, theme. What is this novel about? And they've been doing literary criticism, but that doesn't help you write a book. What I tell people is that theme comes about automatically, right? Theme is
Mhm.
so central to your story. If your story is about this need to belong, you can't get away from that theme. That is
Mhm.
going to happen no matter what because it's so important to your life. What is hard is coming up with plot. So, what I help people do is figure out their plot, which is a different question. What is your story? What happens in your book? Which is a different question than what's your theme. It's actually really easy to know your theme. It's
Mhm.
so easy that it happens automatically in your book. What is hard is coming up with plot. So, I don't focus a lot on theme because it happens automatically. Story gets you to theme, not the other way around.
Yeah. So trying to figure out how to structure, how to create the plot. Where to start? Where to start, Wendy?
Okay, so I started going off on, what is plot? And I said it
Yeah.
was connected events. It took me a
Mhm.
long time to take all of this information that came at me and all of these thousands of manuscripts I read year after year as a memoir coach and really coming up with these principles. And they really boil down to this idea. Plot, I can say it in two words, is connected events, right? It really does boil down to that. And connected events, your events are your scenes. Things happen in your scenes, and they're connected with transitions. The scenes, after a scene, you have a transition, and the transition is there to let your reader know what the next event has to do with the event they just read. So, what this scene has to do with the next one. And in memoir writing, it's really egregious. People forget to do this. They tell us a bunch of stuff they did, right? They go to Paris and they tell us, first of all, I found an apartment. Let's say your book's about moving to Paris. I found an apartment. And the next day I went sightseeing. And the next day I practiced my French for the first time. That's not a story. That's a bunch of stuff you did. So you have the makings of scenes, things that happened, but you need to connect them in your transitions with an idea that makes these things relevant.
Mhm.
Right. So that's kind of your how the components work. And you said you wanted to get into it, Kelley. So
Yes,
I'm throwing it all at you.
I
Yeah.
love it. I love it.
So you asked, okay, I didn't even answer your question yet, but you said, what is the first step?
Yeah.
And so with that in mind, the first question you ask yourself is what happened? What happened that I want to talk about? And the answer to that question will eventually become your scenes, right? So the first question is what happened? Not what is my theme, but what happened? You can't have a story without things happening, right? And the problem I see a lot of memoir writers make is they describe their life. Let me tell you about the summer when I was 8 years old. Every day I would go visit my grandmother. And then, and there was also this bully and he terrified me. And so they're describing their life. But a reader doesn't really care about your life. A reader wants a good story. So what we want to do is take what happened to you and turn that into plot. And you can't have plot without things happening. So it's very different than description. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yes, it
Yeah.
does. It does make sense. It makes a lot of sense. And you say memory can actually get in the way, right?
Can because in our brains, you think about being 8 years old and you remember that summer and all of those things you lived through, and it feels like a story. It really
Mhm.
does. It feels like it, and it's just not. And so, one of the biggest challenges I have when I work with people is having them leave things out because they're not helping to tell a story, right? And it's really tough. It's not hard for me because I don't have those memories, right? I can be objective about this, but the people are like, but but my dog died that summer. And I'm like, I know, but how is that advancing your plot? So it can be really tough emotionally too to leave these things out.
Maybe in another book. Maybe there's
Uh,
two,
we'll do, we'll do another book about your dog dying. Absolutely. Yes.
another theme, another. You really speak out against a lot of widely accepted writing tips. I'd like to go through some of these and talk about them. Let's start, and I think we've already sort of started getting into it, but with the belief that show, don't tell is advice that could destroy a book.
Yes, it really is. I get riled up when I read this advice, not that it is wrong, but it is almost always misinterpreted, right? I mean, it has to have some
Mhm.
basis in truth. I learned that too, when probably in high school I learned it, right? It's been around forever. And part of the problem is people repeat it because, they've heard it and then they don't really, so they hear it so many times that it must be true. And it is true, but it's misinterpreted. And so it's a little bit like that game of telephone that, did you play that as a kid
Mhm.
where
Yeah.
right? You whisper in someone's ear, and by the time it's gone to the 20th person, whatever it was you said has changed so much. So I think it started with a basis in truth, and then people started interpreting it in their own way to the point that it no longer is valid the way that people are interpreting it. So why? So the way I see it interpreted that is just false, false, false is that you don't ever want to tell us how your characters, if you're talking about fiction or memoir, or how you are feeling. Don't tell me how you're feeling. You want to show me. So this is the example I see, the classic example. And so the way you should do this is describe, his arms were, he his fists were, he clenched his fists, his face was red, the rage was evident in every pore of his body, or, whatever, right? And so you're giving me this visual experience. And honestly, when people try too hard to give their reader a visual experience on the page, it's not interesting. It's not emotionally affecting. And so the problem with show don't tell is this other problem that you should create this visual experience for your reader. And that is also not true. You want to create an emotional experience for your reader, right? And so yes, every time you have someone visualize something, you actually make them have to concentrate quite hard. And
Mhm.
so I talk about the difference between objective and subjective writing. You want more subjective writing than objective writing in your book. And just one more quick thing. Sorry
I
to give you
want to
the
get
world's
further
longest
into all of
answer.
these. So,
I'm like, I get really passionate about this. Visual experience. That was what I
yes.
wanted to talk about. So people think that it should be visual, but that's not the case. And so I am contradicting a lot of memoir or a lot of common writing wisdom.
Mhm.
And I say to people, look, don't believe me. Take this advice that you're reading, that you're getting online, that gurus are espousing, go to your favorite books and see if it holds up because it doesn't. And so I have a YouTube channel, and one of my favorite things to do now, so I talk about memoir and literary fiction. I don't really do genre commercial fiction or super commercial fiction, right?
Mhm.
And so literary fiction and memoir tend to be similar. So if you
Mhm.
are writing genre fiction, commercial fiction, fine. That's not what I specialize in. But what one of my favorite things to do on my YouTube channel is to take the common advice I get and show how it absolutely works if you want to write a romance novel. The bodice bursting,
Mhm.
bare-chested man on the cover. That show don't tell holds up perfectly there. But
Mhm.
and so one of my videos, I use Toni Morrison's novels as an example of how she does the
Mhm.
exact opposite of so many bits of common wisdom that is out there. So it's not a matter of believe me as opposed to them. Take this advice, look at your favorite books, and see if it holds up in the real world. So
That's great. I love that. That's really interesting. And you also say that writing from the five senses is overrated. Is that part of this Getting too
is.
dragged into the showing?
So there's nothing wrong with it, right? But I heard that way back when I was in college, right from the 5 cents. I was like, it's not that it's not true, but that's why your reader is picking up a book. Like if
Mhm.
I want, I'm not really there to know that your grandmother's kitchen smelled of oregano. Like it's fine. It's a nice detail, but it's just it's overrated in terms of its importance. There are so many things on the scale to make a story interesting to your reader that this is just not going to move the scale that much. It's not wrong. There's nothing wrong with it. It's overemphasized, I feel, by people who don't really have much to teach. It's like, what makes writing good? I don't know. You should affect my 5 senses. It's an easy answer, but I think that's not the true answer. So it's not that it's wrong, but I don't think that's what makes writing good or not. I've read incredible novels by award-winning novelists who really didn't affect my 5 senses. What did they do? They affected me emotionally. They gave me interesting thoughts that made me think about the world I live in, that made me think about my life. That's what I care about in a book, not that I knew that the kitchen smelled of oregano.
Yeah. How do you do that then? If you're how to emotionally
Yeah.
affect a reader?
I love your questions. It's a yeah, exactly what makes a book good. So
Yeah.
I've been pondering that question since I was a teenager, really. I mean, I've been pondering it forever, and I got more and more data as I wrote more and as I taught more. And I love this question. What makes a book good? Well, I will tell you what makes it emotionally affecting. What makes it emotionally affecting is subjective writing, right? People are taught incorrectly, I want give your reader this visual experience and let them visualize everything. And I say give them an emotional experience. And so one of the things I teach is the importance of putting me inside your head in your book, right? Especially
Mhm.
as a memoirist. And this is true for fiction as well. In fiction, you can have an omniscient narrator. You can put me inside all your characters' heads
Mhm.
or not. You can put me inside, you have more choices. As a memoirist, put me inside your head, the narrator's head. Give me the thoughts that you had at the time. Now you won't remember them. So that's the art of memoir writing, is emulating what you probably thought at the time. But if you look at award-winning fiction or memoir, very, very literary fiction and memoir are closely related,
Mhm.
you will see that the writing feels like we are reading the author's thoughts or reading the narrator's thoughts. It really does. There is so much thinking on the page, and there's not that much happening. So it is this internal experience. Another YouTube video I do is I highlight, I take pieces of texts and I highlight all the subjective writing. Like how much of it should be subjective? That depends on you. There's some
Mhm.
leeway here, but a lot, at least 50%, right? And people make the mistake of describing all these things and thinking that I should visualize what the story that they're trying to tell me. That's not the case. It's hard to do that. In fact, it becomes you have to concentrate too hard when everything is described in detail. So
Can
put your thoughts
you
down on the page. Sorry.
can
Yeah.
you describe exactly what you mean when you're saying the objective versus subjective writing, just to make sure it's clear what everyone.
So the easiest way, because I really needed a definition so that this
Mhm.
were not vague concepts, I say that objective writing is anything that a video camera would pick up. So
Mhm.
that means dialogue is objective. I heard it's anything that anyone who was present would agree happened at the time, theoretically, right? So
Mhm.
if if we're watching, if this is a news event, every witness would kind of have the same story, right? The things that people said, the things that happened, the couch was blue, the weather, it was raining that day. The subjectivity is what actually makes it really interesting. And it's counterintuitive because people think, who cares about my point of view? But we really do. We need to root for you. We're really trusting you. We're really counting on your emotional experience to become our own.
Mm.
And so like a good movie where you're transported, a movie is fiction. These people never lived, right?
Mhm.
Still, the narrator loses her mother and you sob along with the narrator, right? We are affected by this, right? And so the goal is to transport your reader and give them your experience. And the only way you can do that is by putting them inside your head, by giving them your thoughts, right? By giving them this subjective writing,
Mhm.
which is what affects someone emotionally. It is what transports your reader. It's not that they saw what you lived through. It's that they've had your thoughts. And that is where, so I tell people, don't use emotion words. Don't say, I was sad, I was happy, today I was so happy. When you do that, what you're saying to your reader's like, oh, that day the narrator was happy. But when you give us the happy thoughts that went through your head, you make your reader feel happy. That's when you're transporting your reader. That's when they are having the same emotional experience you did. Not by you saying you were happy, but putting the thoughts that went on through your head at the time. That's to
Yeah,
lift your reader emotionally.
that's great. You also don't believe in the crappy first draft. Is that true?
Yeah. You're calling me out on all of these things today, Kelley. Okay,
Well,
yes,
I
you're
just think
right.
it's
I
so
love
interesting.
it. I love it. No, I do. I don't. And I used to because that was it. It kind of goes back to the five senses. That was all the
Mhm.
advice I had. And so, you work with it because that's all you're going to get. I don't believe in it because I, again, feel it's said by people who don't have anything to teach you. Write a crappy first draft is like, I'll figure it out.
Mhm.
I mean, what other art form do they tell that to you? Like if you were going to learn how to play the flute, what flute teacher hands you a flute and says, just figure it out? Eventually you'll get there. I mean, it's ridiculous. What ballet teacher says, around for a while, eventually you'll learn ballet. There are
Mhm.
concepts. And I think so. I'm really passionate about this because the concepts, no one gave them to me. So I had to figure them out myself. And I love it because these concepts work. Again, they're principles, they're not a formula. All books rely on these principles. And so I'm really passionate about don't write a crappy first draft. Write an outline that is going to follow the principles of structure. And you don't have to do this, first draft, second draft, third draft. The other problem with write a crappy first draft is you don't know what you're doing and it's not necessarily getting better, right? It's kind of like hop around a little more, right? As a ballet, using
Mhm.
the ballet example, it's not necessary. You don't know what you're doing right or wrong. So now you're just doing it again. People are so frustrated because like, I don't know what to edit. I don't know what to change. I don't know how to make this better. Of course you don't, right? You don't have any principles and no one is guiding you and teaching you what makes a book good, what creates plot, what makes your book emotionally affecting for a writer, or I'm sorry, for a reader. So I get frustrated because just write is, it's so not helpful. It's like, go
Yeah.
just do ballet, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But now, do you think it's maybe a little different for fiction versus memoir in this crappy first draft world? Because I don't typically write memoir. I write fiction. And I do feel that when I start a new story, sometimes it's like you're just trying to get a story out
Yeah.
to work with.
Yeah.
And when you're working with memoir, maybe you've
I
already
agree with
got
you.
that there to work
I
with.
do. So I think so again, here's where fiction and
Mm.
memoir. Now, I don't think it's a terrible idea to think about your entire story, even if you're a fiction writer. It's
Mm-hmm.
a matter of style, how you do it. I am hesitant to give advice to fiction writers because I don't specialize in it. So I don't know
Mm-hmm.
that. I think fiction here is a little bit different. With memoir, you have way too much information. And
Yeah.
you're, again, trying to scrape away, and what is left is plot. So if you are just writing and you're just coming up with more information in every draft, to be honest with you, and
Yeah.
it just gets harder and harder and messier and messier. But I can absolutely see that as a fiction writer, kind of finding your way. I absolutely can.
You have been teaching for many years. We're talking about your book that's just come out, but you also founded Memoir Writing for Geniuses. Can you talk about Memoir Writing for Geniuses a little bit, the work that you do there and how it got started and your YouTube channel?
Again, the book that just came out really is the fruit of what I've been doing as a coach for memoir writing for geniuses. So I became a memoir writing coach, I want to say 17 years ago, and eventually formed my own company. And we offer coaching, we do classes. So I think all of these things kind of merge.
Mhm.
Um, so um, yeah, so how I guess I went from so I initially started working for a company called Media Bistro, and I was a coach for them for I want to say 7 years. I'm gonna lose the chronology here. Memory is your worst enemy as a memoir writer, and it's not mine. So um and then I just went out. They actually got bought out. I really liked them a lot. They got bought out, and I had wanted to do this on my own anyway. So little by little, I started getting clients. And then it eventually became a company, and now I have other coaches that work for me. So we offer coaching and courses and are really believers that learning concepts is the way to get to a memoir, not just write, right? And so some coaches are kind of take that just right approach where they look at your manuscript and they edit it. I really hate that idea. We really like to help you come up with plot before you write. So I do believe in editing. So when I say, don't write a crappy first draft, I really do believe that. I think your first draft should be pretty solid, but we do help people polish their prose, right? But that is something I think a writer can see on their own. Oh, the next day you're like, oh, I can make this sentence better. So I absolutely believe in editing. But what I don't like is editing a plot that doesn't work. So many people are trying to edit when they really need to rethink their story. That's what frustrates me. So that's what we try and help people do is come up with their plot before they write their book. And if they've already written their book, we also help them come up with their plot. We help them fix their structure.
How did you come to writing?
Oh, wow. I was a kid who loved books. I was this nerdy little girl who identified with characters in books and who spoke to characters in books more than I spoke to real life people. Oh, I still remember I remember learning to read. Oh, see, I really do. I remember it was green eggs and ham. I still remember like finishing that book and just the love of words. I've always loved words. I love language. How did I come to write? So I guess it depends on how far back you want me to go. But I've been writing and reading since I was very, very young and loved books, loved novels really more than anything. Grew up with classic literature, and when I discovered contemporary novels, that was a huge thing for me. Kind of always wanted to become a writer. Did other things, but really deep down, that was what I always wanted to do.
What was the road to publication like for you?
Yeah, so things have changed a lot. So my book came out in 2003. What happened was I wrote a manuscript that I thought was brilliant. It wasn't, by the way. This is why I have a lot of empathy for the people I work with because I thought, oh, I wrote all these great stories from my life. I didn't realize it didn't have plot, but I spent quite a few years on it and talking about my first memoir and sent it out to a ton of agents. Got some interest, lots of rejections. In the end, one agent, I still remember the day she called me up. She called me up and said, you have this great narrative voice, but you know nothing about structure. If you're willing to restructure your book, I will consider taking you on as a client. And I remember this very clearly because my thought was, what is the structure thing she's talking about? Because I'd never heard the word, which is, one reason I became this expert in memoir structure was because I struggled with it so much on my own. So her name was Stephanie Lee. She worked for an agency called Manus and Associates. They're in Palo Alto, California. And so I worked with her for a year to restructure the book because I didn't know anything about structure. And we had a pretty good manuscript. The book went out to publishers, went up for sale. So the original title was I Can't Hear You with the Tanks Driving By. So it's this book about getting in trouble in different places around the world, lesser visited countries. That was the original title. It went up for sale to publishers on September 10th, 2001.
Mm,
One day before September 11th, right?
mhm,
It's
mhm.
not a good time to be laughing about bombs, right?
Right.
So the book had a really rough time. Stephanie wrote to me that emailed me the morning of September 11th. This is not looking good for your book, right? So it was in Big Five. Did we have five publishers? I don't know, Big Seven. What was it back, in the early 2000, in 2001, actually. Yes, so miraculously, so there were several publishers interested. When the dust settled, I still had a book contract, so that was good. So went with traditional publishing. It was published by Crown, which is a division of Random House. But it had a rough time, especially with September 11th, right, in
Yeah.
trying to get the book published. So
How did you get into teaching?
back into teaching. So a lot of my stories start, um, I was in some random country, ran out of money completely, and this is one of them. I was living in Bolivia.
Mm.
Um, Lots of things happened and ran out of money and said, well, I need to do something. And Media Bistro had actually contacted me years earlier, and they had wanted me to teach a course on travel writing. And I had said no to them because I didn't really feel competent to do it. I feel like I'm not really a magazine travel writer. But I know about memoir writing, but that didn't occur to me at the time. I was doing other things. And so I kind of had Media Bistro on the back of my head when I ran out of money in Bolivia, and I'm like, I need to do something. So I called them up and said, hey, I'm available as a memoir writing teacher. And they're like, great, we'll take you. I mean, so I started teaching memoir writing for them. I didn't think I would do it for more than a year or two. I was just, and I fell so in love with this idea that there were concepts that existed when it came to memoirs that it really, I have to say, it really did become my life's work. It wasn't intentional. I didn't set down this path going, I want to understand the principles that all memoirs follow. But as I started teaching, I became so passionate. What started as a job that I needed for money
Yeah.
really turned into this passion of trying to understand the principles that all memoirs rely on. So
I love how I just love how that worked out. That's goosebumps.
yeah.
Um, what do you love most about teaching?
I I like figuring things out. Well,
Hmm.
I like figuring. My dad's an engineer, and he taught me, you never memorize anything. You pick things apart, and you piece them back together. So I love that way of looking at the world, at knowledge, of understanding something deeply. So right now, I love the fact that I understand memoir. Whereas I didn't a long time ago when I first started teaching. I really understand the moving parts. So that is really fun for me. And it's also just really fun to work with kind people who have incredible stories. People come to me with such rich stories, beautiful stories. They have everything it takes, but they don't know how to turn those beautiful stories and that beautiful message into something that someone else will appreciate. So I love helping people do that. It's really fulfilling. It's really exciting.
What do you know now that you wish you had known before you published your memoir?
I think I'm glad. I think I'm glad I didn't know how little I knew. That is honestly the honest answer. Ignorance is bliss. If I realized how little I actually knew about writing a memoir, I probably wouldn't have done it. So good for that younger Wendy who really had no clue what she was doing, because realizing how little I know, how little I actually knew might have stopped me. Obviously, in retrospect, this whole understanding of structure, but there was just no way I could have known it back then, right? Because I did look for it. When Stephanie, my agent at the time, said, "You know nothing about structure," I went everywhere. I did try and find, what is this structure thing she's talking about? I went to Barnes and Noble, I went to the writing section. I looked everywhere and I just didn't find it. So I did sort of know that I needed to learn about structure. I had no clue how involved it would be or this long path that it would take me down. So,
Do you have a favorite piece of advice for aspiring authors?
are you look so in terms of very practical advice, it would really be your message is the easy part. You need to work on your plot. Like that would be that when people come to work with me, they're so excited about their message. And I understand that, and I don't want to dampen that enthusiasm. But to get to that message, you have to start with plot. Obviously I can tell you what my advice wouldn't be. It wouldn't be just right. It would be, um, in terms of like being a writer, I would say it's worth it. It's really worth it. You sometimes forget the impact you're having on other people. When my book first came out, I do remember a little bit of envy for my musician friends, because as a musician, you stand in front of an audience and you see people respond. You see how you're affecting them emotionally. You get that applause.
Mhm.
As a writer, you don't, and you sometimes forget that people are actually reading your words. So when it comes to being a writer, to not forget that you don't actually get that feedback immediately, but you are actually changing people's lives.
It's a great way to think about it. We have a traditional last question on the podcast. I normally ask authors what they think the theme song should be when their book is made into a movie or series. But since this has been more of a craft talk, I thought I
Mm.
would ask you if you can think of a kind of theme song for your approach to memoir in general. Or you can also
Oh,
pick a theme song for your memoir.
oh no. Okay, so first of all, this is the hardest question. Let me tell you why. I have the worst memory for remembering song titles. So, okay, so you're gonna have to help me here. You're gonna have to help me remember.
Okay,
Yeah.
I can try to help
So,
you remember a song title. Let's see.
okay, let's go for like what kind of music? Uh, I think it's kind of a punk rock book. I gotta be honest with you, because it really contradicts so much commonly held wisdom. So we
Mhm.
gotta go with like the Ramones or something. I'm trying to think of something the Ramones. I we gotta get some Sex Pistols song. It would be a punk rock theme, to be honest with you. So
I that's perfect. That was a perfect response. We don't have to get too
good.
specific, but I like the punk rock vibe. That's amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I don't
We-
look punk rock, but the book is kind of punk rock deep down.
Wendy Dale, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk today. It has been really enlightening and wonderful getting the chance to talk with you.
Thank you so much, Kelley. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for joining us on Literary Prospects. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you next time.